Hope this finds you well. We'll welcome you back to the spirit of Scotland. In the last video we were down in the Karstlands looking at where the route of the Battle of Bannockburn may have taken place on day 2 of the battle, and some people believe where the battle itself might have taken place on day 2. And I mentioned towards the end of that video that we would look at all the places that were considered by some of the historians to be possible venues for the battle on day 2 of the Battle of Bannockburn. And there are probably 3 places. There's the Carse immediately in front of the Forth, there's the Carse between the Pell Stream and the Bannockburn, and the place I've come down to today to show you is called the Dryfield, and that's where I'm going to take you, because some people consider that day 2 of the battle may have taken place on what is called the Dryfield.
A lot of people think that the battle took place down on the Carse where the English stayed overnight. Myself and most historians, we don't take that view. We believe that the English came back up onto this field here known as the Dryfield for the simple reason that the Carse, although it looks like lovely flat farmland today, was very different in the Middle Ages.
So as we continue our quest to find the epicentre of day 2 of the Battle of Bannockburn, I've brought you down here on this beautiful Sunday morning to have a look around and come to a conclusion as to whether we think the battle, day 2 of the battle, may have taken place on the Dryfield of Bannockburn. So where is the Dryfield? Well, the woods you see in front of you is Balquidderock Wood, an ancient woodland, and that's been there since 1314 in one form or another. Area below it is the beginning of the flat Karstlands, which ultimately lead to the River Forth, which is to the south east behind me here. Now, what was this area like back in 1314? Well, we kind of know actually, because there was a topographical study done recently. A chap called Richard Tipping, he done a study of the land conditions and use as it was back in 13 for Stirling University. And he came to the conclusion that the area immediately below the Balquidderock Wood, which we're going to walk through just shortly, was pretty marshy and boggy. And surprisingly, as you get closer to the River Forth, the land got harder and better. Because obviously what you had was runoff, probably a lot of runoff from the woodland, which is on a slope, which we will see just shortly. And there's a ridge runs right from this area right along to Stirling, probably about a mile long, a long ridge. And the runoff from that ridge would come down here onto the flat Carse and cause it to be quite marshy and wet, and there would be peat back in the day. We know that that was farmed for quite some time before, and perhaps a little bit after Bannockburn. So where we're standing today, this is an area called Broom Ridge. It's been turned over to housing now, and we're going to walk through the housing area up to the entrance of Balquidderock Wood. So here we are at the foot of Balquidderock Wood. An ancient oak woodland and local nature reserve. Now, the wood itself has remained unharvested over the years because it actually rises up to the Dryfield on a 30-degree slope, and it would just be much too difficult back in the day to clear this. And this 30-degree slope is a ridge which runs right along towards Stirling, probably about a mile long. Now, the Scots were camped up at the top of this ridge, probably towards the St Ninians area, and an area which is called the New Park, and it's much further to the kind of southeast of where I'm walking just now, that day one of the battle began, when the English vanguard, which is the cavalry, crossed the Bannockburn, and we hear the stories of De Boon being slayed by Bruce with his axe, and Hereford and Gloucester being routed by the Scottish army and sent back over the burn, and Clifford and Beaumont being routed by Thomas Randolph from the Scottish army and being sent back. Their men ran towards the castle for safety and back down to the main army, the main English army on the Carshlands. So we're just approaching the top of the slope through the Balquidderoch Wood. Now, would it be feasible for the English to leave the Cars and come up here in the morning to fight a battle? Let's go up and have a look and discuss it. On my left, as we just enter onto the Dryfield itself, we have Bannockburn High School. So this is us. In a few moments we'll get a better view of the area and have a discussion. So here we are on the Dryfield area. Balquidderoch Wood, the ancient woodland, is just to my right hand side. Stirling Castle is about a mile to my north. Bannockburn High School just a few hundred yards behind me. And it's in this area some people believe the English came on day 2 of the battle. So how did they come to that conclusion? And why do I think it didn't happen here? There were some historians, and most historians in fact, I do believe, accept that the English camped down on the Cars. It is quite explicit in some of the chronicles. Barber mentions it, that they camped overnight down on the Cars, which was a marshy place. And Thomas Gray, who wrote about Bannockburn from Edinburgh Castle, his father fought here, and the son, when he was captured, wrote an account of his discussion with his father. And he also mentioned that the English debauched onto a Cars beyond the Bannockburn in front of the Forth. So that's down in the Carshland. So it's pretty well much accepted that the English army, after they were routed on day 1 of the Battle of Bannockburn, camped down in the Carshland. Now the question is, did they stay down there and fight on day 2? Or did they come from the Carshland up at the break of dawn onto the Dryfield here and fight here? Now, to understand perhaps what might went on, we've really got to look at day 1 and what happened there. The Scots were camped in an area called the New Park, and that was on the main road, the high road if you like, from the Cars perspective. That was on the main road towards Stirling Castle. Now the English army were coming up from a southerly direction. They were coming through an area called the Torwood. That's where the main road came. There was a Roman road, a main road came through the Torwood from the Falkirk area up to the Bannockburn. Now in front of the English army was the vanguard, i.e. the cavalry, the knighted armours. These were the elite, thought they were the best. They were well ahead of the main body of the infantry and the baggage train. Now we know that the English cavalry, the vanguard, were well ahead of the rest of the body of the English army, the infantry and the baggage train. They wanted the glory. They wanted to take on the Scottish army and get the glory of defeating them on day 1. But they were routed by King Robert the Bruce and sent back across the Bannockburn. So there is nothing to suggest that the main body of the English army crossed this Bannockburn at Milton and then came down through Balquidderock Wood. Why is that important? Well, the other route was to the south of the Bannockburn, takes you down past Greenyards and Goosecroft bus area, takes you down a slope onto the Carshlands. Now we know from the topographical study that was done by a guy called Richard Tipping, we've previously mentioned him, that the area at the bottom of the slope of the wood was marshy. It caught all the runoff from the wood. It was a marshy area. And we know from the chronicles that the English stripped the roof off local houses and the doors and the shutters, and that during the night people came from the castle, English people came from the castle with doors and shutters to lay across the pools and the marshy areas to allow their horse and their baggage train to cross on to the plain, where it is stated in the chronicles that they sought an area of hard ground that would be beneficial for their cavalry in the morning. So that's what they did, and they camped on the Carse overnight, and most historians would agree with that. Now, to come back up here the next day to fight on the Dryfield, as some people believe happened, there's two routes they could take. They could retrace their steps from the first day to the south of the Bannockburn, back up towards Milton, and come on to cross at Milton and come on to the Dryfield that way. But why would they do that? This was an area now controlled by the Scots. They had repelled, pushed back the English here on the first day back across the Bannockburn. This was controlled by the Scots. So why would they take that risk of coming back up a difficult journey, back up over that marshy area, over which they had laid shutters and doors and roofs and thatch, to cross at a pinch point to an area that had already been defeated? That seems unlikely. Alternatively, they could take the route that we have just taken up through Balquidderock Wood. But then we know the area at the bottom of that was marshy and didn't have shutters, doors and thatch to help them on their way. So would they make the difficult journey from the hard field of the Carshland on which they had camped, across a marshy area at the foot of the ancient Balquidderock Wood, up a 30-degree slope and onto the Dryfield here? Now additionally, it's said that they fought upon a plain. Now we consider a plain to be a flat area of ground. The Dryfield area is undulating. There's a depression right in front of me, and beyond the depression it rises gently up towards the Milton and St Ninian's area. And to the north it is undulating once more, not suitable for a heavy cavalry charge. So that also goes against the Dryfield area. So why do people believe that the English made that difficult journey from the hard ground in which they were camped on the Carse, up through a marsh, up a 30-degree slope and onto this undulating ground? Well, just to the south of me here, there is what some people consider to be a ditch or a great ditch, which was mentioned in the chronicles, where the English got trapped when they were pushed back and many of them were drowned or slaughtered. And I can understand why they might make that link, as tenuous as it might be. But we're going to go and have a look at that, and you can make your own mind up, and I'll give you my impressions of what I think. But standing here just now, looking at the depression in the grounds and the undulations all around, the difficult journey it would be to get here in the morning, over marsh and up through ancient woodland, I believe that this most definitely was not the place of day 2 of the battle. But let's go and look at the great ditch, in inverted commas, that some people believe exists to the south of me here, and we'll continue the discussion. Some people have asked me, why is it important that we find the centre of day 2 of the Battle of Bannockburn? Well, I think it's important that we recognise it and build a memorial to remember what was the greatest battle that ever took place in Scottish history. That's very important. It's a respectful thing to do, isn't it? To remember the men and women of history whose names, whose individual names may have been lost to the sands of time, but whose actions have helped define a nation. They've helped to define us as the people we are today. I think it's important that we remember that, and that we put a memorial, which we do not have, to recognise Day 2 of the battle. And we need to get that sorted so that ourselves and future generations and visitors from around the world can come and pay their respects and learn and educate themselves about the greatest battle that ever took place in Scottish soil. Now we're walking down to an area that many people consider to be the Great Ditch, the area mentioned in the Chronicles where the English became trapped and where many drowned when they were trying to flee the battle during the rout. So I'm walking down to Ladywell Park in Bannockburn, and you can see it's fairly steep-sided on both sides, bottoms out to a nice flat area where there's a cracking football pitch. And we're going to go down there and have a look. You may be able to make out the Telford Bridge there, under which the Bannockburn flows. And here is the Bannockburn as it flows through the Ladywell Park area. Fairly broad but very shallow, and even in heavy water I don't suppose it would be overly deep and difficult to cross. And on the far side you may get an idea of the steepness of the slope going up. It is steep but readily manageable by foot soldiers and horse, I would suggest. So as I stroll through Ladywell Park on a beautiful Sunday morning, let's consider whether I think the Dryfield was an area used as Day 2 for the Battle of Bannockburn. And I go back to some of the written chronicles. Thomas Gray, whose father fought at Bannockburn, had written an account called the Scala Chronica whilst imprisoned at Edinburgh Castle. He was an Englishman, he'd been caught in a subsequent battle, and he wrote an account of the battle after discussions with his father. And he wrote that after the Scots had routed the English on day 1 and had left the field, the English who had come through the wood, now that would be the Tor Wood, that's where the baggage train and the body of their army, the infantry, who were behind the cavalry and vanguard, as they are known, who had been routed, they would be coming through the Tor Wood. They met with their captains who told them about the rout, and the English king decided not to fight further that day, but to camp on the Carse. Now they did not cross the Bannockburn at that point at Milton or Charter Hall or anywhere to the south of us just now. They travelled down this direction, which is kind of southwards of the Bannockburn, southeast perhaps, down past Greenyards, Goosecroft, down the slope towards the plain, towards the Carselands. And when they got there, they found it was marshy, swampy, full of pools of water. And they used the roof from houses, the doors stolen from houses, thatch, shutters from windows, and the English from the castle came down to help them to bridge the pools and the marshy areas so that they could get their cavalry and baggage train across the Bannockburn. John Barber, the Scots chronicler, said they camped overnight on the karstlands. Thomas Gray is even more explicit, saying they debauched upon a plain near the water of the Forth beyond the Bannockburn. So we know they camped there. They had to leave from the karstlands, some would have you consider, to come up to the Dryfield to fight the battle the next day. So what would that entail? Well, they would have to retrace their steps to use those shutters, thatch, doors, windows that they had used to cross the marshy area, back up the far side of the Bannockburn, up to the crossing near Milton, and cross into an area which is now controlled by the Scottish Army. That's totally unfeasible and would be suicidal, in my opinion. The alternative would be to leave the cars, cross the marshy area at the foot of the ancient Balquidderock Wood, come up through the 30-degree slope of a heavily wooded area, onto the Dryfield area, the undulating Dryfield area, which continues on a slope up towards Milton and St Ninian's area and is unsuitable for heavy cavalry. That would give the Scots the high ground. So do I consider that that's what they've done? No. I don't think a fool that even many people thought the English king may have been would have made that decision. His captains and generals would not allow that to happen. And in this area, where some people consider the English were hemmed in during the rout, couldn't cross the Bannockburn, this isn't a ditch in my opinion. This is more of a gorge. It's wide, it's fairly steeply sloping on either side, but it is navigable by men on foot, and even men on horse, I would consider, could make their way across here in certain areas. So it wasn't the bottleneck that trapped them, which was actually described as a muddy, slimy, deep, wet area where many people drowned or had great difficulty getting out or died. And I consider this area as too vast. When Barber talked about there were so many dead in that ditch you could walk dry shod over the dead bodies. My God, you would need 20,000 plus down here for that to be the case. So given all that, given the evidence of the chronicles, having walked the ground and considered it all, I think, in my personal opinion, we dismiss the Dryfield area as being an area where day 2 of the Battle of Bannockburn took place, and it leaves us with the karstlands, which increasing numbers of people now believe was the place where day 2 of the Battle of Bannockburn took place. It's just finding the epicentre. For me, I need to prove it. We're left with 2 areas to consider, between the Pell Stream and the Bannockburn, which is a standout favourite area for most people, or beyond the Pell Stream and between the Bannockburn and the Forth. As Thomas Gray says, they debauched upon a plain beyond the Bannockburn near the Forth. But is that where the fight took place? Really, the evidence would be in finding something, wouldn't it? Or proving beyond doubt just through the logistics of it all. So we'll be going back down to the karstlands to look at those areas and come to a final conclusion of where I think day 2 of the Battle of Bannockburn took place. And ultimately, where we can build a befitting memorial to those people whose individual names and faces of those men and women have been lost to the sands of time, but where a befitting memorial can be built for the efforts that they made in defending their nation and leading us to be the nation that we are today. And where future generations can go and educate themselves on Scottish history and learn as we go forward. So tune into future episodes of Spirit of Scotland. Share this with your friends and subscribe to the channel. And it helps me get some feedback and form future videos for you to enjoy as you enjoy your coffee on beautiful Sunday mornings. Thanks again.